Next on Garden Line, the Capitol Lake Fountain in Pierre, shade-tolerant annuals,
violas are another group of plants that do well in the shade,
and caring for that new tree.
What's better to use is a shredded bark mulch.
This program is funded in part by Swiftel Communications.
Hello and welcome to Garden Line. I'm John Kiekefer. Tonight we will feature the landscaping at the Capitol Lake Fountain on the Capitol grounds in Pierre. We will also go into a greenhouse to learn which annuals are best suited for shady areas, and then we will return to the backyard to learn how to care for that newly planted tree. Joining me in the studio to answer your questions are Casey Jensen, SDSU Wildlife and Fishery Sciences.
Glad to be here.
Jerry Mills, Brown County Extension Horticulture Educator.
Good evening. Good to be here.
Mike Mechnig, Extension Weed Specialist.
Yeah, good to be back on the show, John.
And Dennis Toddy, Extension Climatologist.
Thanks for having me.
The phone number for you to call tonight is 1-866-595-SDSU. Again, that is 1-866-595-7378. Helping answer the phones tonight are a group from the North Central Agricultural Research Lab. Please provide them with as many details as possible about your garden problem, when it appeared, and any surrounding plants with your question. Before we get to your questions, Garden Line visited with Dave Graper, Extension Horticulture Specialist, in a greenhouse to learn what varieties of annuals are good choices for shady areas.
Well, this week on Garden Line, I want to show you a few plants that are adapted to growing in the shade. It's important to remember that for most plants, they really don't prefer to be in the shade. We just have a number of plants that will tolerate those lower light conditions. Of course, most people think about impatiens as probably being the king of the shade plants, and that probably is true. There's a lot of different varieties available out there. And we're seeing a lot of breeding work being done with impatiens. And one group of plants that we've really seen a lot of work with are the New Guinea impatiens. And we have a variety of different colors here. They come in really quite a wide variety of colors. You can really just about get any color you want to match the siding on your house, or just your favorite color combination. Very large flowers, will tolerate a fairly warm location as long as it gets some fairly good shade and plenty of moisture, and a little bit of fertilizer will help too. A relatively new group of plants are called Nemesia. This is one that has white flowers. They come in other shades of color as well, yellow, oranges, purples, blues. Many of them have a nice fragrance to them. This one is called, in fact, Sachet Vanilla. Very nice vanilla type fragrance, good in part shade to medium sun. The violas are another group of plants that do well in the shade. And mainly the reason that they do best in the shade is that they don't get too hot. They don't like it real hot when we get those high temperatures during the summertime. So the violas are another group of plants that give us some interesting color combinations and lots of fun sizes of flowers and shapes of flowers to work with in that particular group of plants. The begonias have been another popular plant tolerant of the shade. Of course, the typical wax begonia or fibrous rooted begonia are lots of good choices in foliage color as well as flower colors with those plants. We also have some of the larger flowered types. This is more of a Rieger type begonia. And we have the tuberous or non-stop begonias that have quite large flowers, and those really do very well in the shade kind of situation. And we also have some of the foliage type of begonias that also look very nice in the shade. Another nice flower colored for an edging plant is lobelia, blues, whites, pinks, and so forth. And finally, one that's kind of a nice one to try are some of the osteospermum. They have flower colors in whites, pinks, lavenders, and blues, some with a nice blue center or sometimes kind of a yellowish center. So we have a lot of things to choose from, a lot of interesting plants to use in that shady garden. And next week we'll be looking at some plants for the sun.
All right, we go into our roundtable discussion, talk about topics of the week, and we ask the panelists at this point about it. First panelist tonight, we've got Casey Jensen here. What do you have for us tonight?
Well, we're just right now in the heart of the migration season for a lot of the songbirds that are moving, either moving through the area or just coming in and setting up their homes for the summer. And right now, for instance, at my place, this morning I counted 7 different species of sparrows. And so I usually go out and throw a handful of seed on the ground because they like to forage on the ground and not really at the feeders. So that's important if you like those there. And also this week we had the reports of the first hummingbirds of the year. The orioles are in, the grosbeaks are in, the ones that are going to be breeding here. And so if you want to feed those birds, it's time to get those feeders out and cleaned up and get the nectar ready. I brought one hummingbird feeder in that I've particularly fond of. One of the problems with hummingbird feeders is keeping them clean, and finally there's a design now with a really wide mouth here that's easy to clean, and you can change the nectar at least weekly. And the nectar for hummingbirds is 4 parts water to 1 part sugar. And if you have a oriole feeder and put nectar out, it's the same proportions, 4 to 1. Grape jelly works well for orioles, or fruit slices, oranges, apples, those kinds of things. So.
Are the hummingbirds something that are likely to stick around then if we're feeding them, or do they disappear?
They may stick around, especially if you have some good nesting habitat around. Some shrubs or mid-sized trees is kind of their preference. But then we tend to get a pulse in the spring, and then a really big pulse in late October and through September, or late August through September. Prior to the fall migration is when people really see large numbers of hummingbirds.
Okay, thanks, Casey. We go to Jerry Mills. What do you have for us tonight, Jerry?
Well, think a moment about sweet potatoes. And when you think about sweet potatoes, you normally think about that's some exotic plant that grows down south, and it shows up on our grocery shelves about the time Thanksgiving rolls around. For us to enjoy with our turkey and all the fixings. But actually, sweet potato can be grown here in South Dakota. It is in the same family as morning glory, and believe it or not, field bindweed. It's in that same family of plants. But don't get the two confused. It does come from, you're agreeing, how many? Okay. It does come from tropical America, and it's very popular. Only second to the Irish potato. The edible portion of a sweet potato is the swollen storage root, but on the Irish potatoes, the edible portion is a fleshy underground stem. So they differ in that way, even though they're called potatoes. The swollen roots that you harvest and eat can range in color from white to orange to red, actually. And most of the plants are long trailing forms, but what works best here in South Dakota for our shorter season are the bush types, the shorter vines. They do require warm days and warm nights to really prosper and give a good yield. Now, many people think that you would plant sweet potatoes as you do the Irish potatoes, just cut them and leave an eye on each section and throw it in the ground. Not so. That doesn't work for sweet potatoes. What you need to do is, just like you did in grade school, you take that sweet potato and you put the toothpicks in it, set it in a glass of water, and you let it root down. Next thing that occurs are the little vegetative sprouts that come out, and these sprouts then you pinch off and put in water or in moistened potting soil, and they root out very quickly. Remember, they're in the same family as Creeping Jenny. And so how do you start? It's not really recommended to get the the roots from the grocery store that are available. Mail order catalogs, many of the nurseries do have these already started, the local nurseries. Otherwise, order some the first year, grow them yourselves, and then from that time on, save those roots, overwinter them, and then start your plants again the next spring. And yes, we can grow sweet potatoes in South Dakota.
And what time would you want to be putting those out?
You want to put them out after all danger of frost is past. Sweet potatoes are very tender. It doesn't take much frost or cold temperatures at all. So somewhere mid-May to the end of May. Most people wait until about Memorial Day in order to put them in. Make sure it's safe. But Dennis will be talking more about that frost and that weather and the safe dates.
Well, this is South Dakota, you know.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jerry. Mike Mechnig, weed problems this week.
Yeah, well, weeds are an ongoing thing, and they're in full force. Things have been kind of holding tight with the cool weather and that sort of thing, but boy, once the weather warms up, watch out. One really tough weed that's really been catching a lot of people's attention this year is creeping bellflower. So I've got some pictures here to show you. You might recognize this in your lawn, mostly probably an East River type of thing, but it likes shade. And it grows in these dense patches like this, and then it kind of thins out as it gets away from the patch. But boy, you look at this patch, it's almost crowding out the grass in the thick parts. So pretty wicked perennial weed. Another picture here we have later on in the season. You might see it start to flower out, and it's actually a nice, pretty flower. In fact, a lot of people around the edge of their house or their fence will let it go to flower and let it go to seed, and thus making the problem even worse. So kind of watch out for that and resist the temptation to have those pretty flowers growing around your house. Last slide here I want to show, the tricky thing about bellflower is identifying it. Well, that's one tricky thing. It looks a lot like our common wild violet, but they're quite a bit different. Wild violet doesn't seem to be really highly invasive. Yeah, you'll see some plants here and there, and they're tough to kill, but that creeping bellflower will get some pretty dense, nasty patches out there. Notice the creeping bellflower has longer leaves, just a kind of a rougher looking leaf, kind of more of a jagged leaf margin. Those subtle characteristics we can look at to differentiate bellflower from wild violet. Now, the tough thing about bellflower is control. If you have this in your lawn, it's a very difficult one to control. You could dig it out, but it does actually develop a nice big taproot or a central root system, and then all these little leaves are coming up from that central root system. So you're going to probably have to dig pretty deep and dig in the center of the dense part of that patch and dig it out as best you can and look for that kind of large, massive root down there. That's one way. If you're going to use herbicides, that's going to be a multiple year thing. You know, you could defoliate it in the spring with any typical lawn broadleaf herbicide, Trimec, Weed Be Gone, that sort of thing. But you're particularly going to want to hit it in the fall before the frost. So, and again, it's going to be a multiple year effort because you really have to deplete that large root system to really knock it out. And it's just not sensitive to herbicides at all. So it's going to be, if you keep at it, eventually you can deplete that thing. So creeping bellflower, tough weed. Key is, with these really tough weeds, watch for them and catch them before they invade your entire lawn, because that's going to save you a lot of headaches later on.
Good advice. Yep. One of those things, nothing to do now unless you're going to dig it, right?
Well, you could spray it just to defoliate
set it back a little bit.
Yeah, and that's all. With any of these perennials, if we spray in the spring, we're just defoliating for the most part. But in the fall, that's when we can really get after those roots.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Dennis Toddy, we asked about frost danger a little bit. What do you have for us as far as weather tonight?
Well, Jerry gave me my lead in here. We had a very nice March and April, which was kind of a change of pace from what we had in last winter. But unfortunately, that March and April set us up for kind of a bad situation. Obviously, we've had a shift the first part of last part of April, first part of May here, from the nice warm temperatures we had all through March and April, and had cooler temperatures now. And the map you see here, these are some of the low temperatures we had from Saturday morning. you can see the Friday night, Saturday event was more focused east or west river, where we had temperatures that went well down into the 20s. There were even some teens reported, 16 or 17, 18 degrees in a couple places. So we did have a very hard freeze there. West River, we're not sure how badly things were damaged. West River, because West River had been cooler over this time period. So plants might have been a little farther behind than East River, so it might not have been damaged as badly. The not pictured here is what happened on Saturday night. We had a second night of freezing temperatures in the Brookings, Del Rapids, Flandreau area where we went below freezing, just discussing and we're trying to assess how much damage there really was. And we wouldn't even really be talking about this in the way of freeze frost if it hadn't been for this warm March and April. Because our average frost date, we'll show you a map here next, that has, Jerry alluded to, our average frost date or average last freeze date here. It's kind of a detailed map, but generally what we're trying to show here is that, and this is the average date of the last time we go below 32 degrees, that kind of frost where we would expect to see some damage. More in the northern part of the state, that is the first week of May is the average time that happens. You get down in the southeastern part of the state, that would be like the last week of April, first part of May. So this freeze was not that uncommon. It's just that it came after this very warm period, so a lot of the crops have been pushed along. A lot of the perennials have been pushed along very quickly, so we're in a situation to be some potential damage. So we'll have to see how things go. We might have to wait for things to warm up before we actually see what damage has been done.
And I'm sure everyone always asks you, longer term forecast, are we looking at more cold weather coming up? Looking to warm up?
The rest of this week, we got another shot of some precip coming midweek, temperatures kind of holding on the cool side. No more freezes, it looks like, this week. End of the week, looks like maybe by Sunday we're back up into the 70s and then going on in a good situation like that. 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day outlooks are staying on the warmer than average side. So there's an outside chance this could be our last one, but as Jerry alluded to, if you want to be completely susceptible or completely away from any freeze chances, you've got to wait till mid to late May before you're really in a good situation with that.
All right. Thanks, Dennis. A few weeks ago, Garden Line made its way across the state and stopped in Pierre for a walk around the Capitol complex. Here's a glimpse at the landscaping around the Capitol Lake Fountain. All right, we get into that segment of the show now that everyone is anxious to see. We open up the lines and we start answering some questions. So we had a question come in by email this last week, and a viewer sent a picture in. Question is, she says, I have a flowering crab that has grown in a leaning position from the wind or from children pulling on it perhaps. It's not known. Is it too late to correct this, or will the tree eventually straighten out? Not sure if the photo came through. It's about 3 inches in diameter, and this question comes to us from Sioux Falls.
A 3-inch tree, that trunk is not going to bend very much, even if you tried to anchor it over to one side or pull it over to one side to straighten that out. Besides that, you'd be putting a good deal of pressure on the roots that are already established and have it growing in that condition. I'd say the real diameter portion of that trunk is going to stay in that somewhat leaning position, but the new growth will eventually reach straight up in the sky. unless there might be one other factor here. That tree may be reaching for sunlight. I don't know what the orientation of that tree is, but sometimes if they're in a shade sunlight situation, they may sometimes reach for the sunlight, and that could be another aspect of what's going on there. But kind of hard to straighten a tree out after it's well established and gain that sort of diameter on the trunk.
Okay. We had another email question, again with a picture. This one I think is from Mike. It says, this year there's a large amount of what looks like shiny cudweed overtaking areas surrounding my vegetable garden and fruit trees. Is there a safe and effective herbicide or control measure that I can use without harming my good plants?
Yeah. Well, that's I'm not exactly sure what that weed is from the picture. Maybe pennycress. It's just hard to say. It's a good picture. I'll give them credit for that. I just can't really tell for sure from what we're seeing there. So maybe once it gets a little larger, we might have a better chance at IDing that weed. Otherwise, you know, it is pretty important to identify what it is, so we know if it's a perennial or an annual. And one way you could determine that is just kind of stick a shovel in there on one plant and kind of dig it up. If it has a long root that's going straight down, there's a good chance that it's just maybe you know, a biennial or an annual type species. Well, since it's this big already, it's probably a biennial. It probably started growing last fall. So if it has that large root going down, it's probably, you know, maybe a biennial. But if the roots are kind of creeping to the side, then there's a good chance it might be a perennial. And so we got to watch out for those. Herbicides, yeah, you're in a really tricky situation there with your fruit trees and your garden and that sort of thing. This weed obviously has some good growth to it. It probably came up earlier, which would have been probably a good time if you wanted to use herbicides to spray it earlier. We might even be able to do it now, as long as a lot of your tree leaves aren't fully leafed out and that sort of thing. If that's a good time to be spraying herbicides, but I would just be spot spraying. You know, I wouldn't broadcast the whole thing because that's going to increase your chances of vapors getting up into your trees and into your garden landscapes, that sort of thing. So we're getting a little bit late on that. Otherwise, maybe this fall we could maybe go after it again, or maybe next year early in the spring. Now, how it got there, boy, there are a lot of ways these seeds get into our lawns. Bird seed, sometimes, not a lot of weed seeds in bird seed, but sometimes we can get a few in that way, or birds just bring them in as they eat on the seeds. Still would encourage people to use bird seed. You know, that's just a minor drawback, but a lot of different ways these things can get in. It's hard to say at this point, but you might want to, like I say, we might want to go after it now. If you don't have a lot of leaves on your trees, but I would just spot spray and be careful. With a spot spray like a Weed B Gone, Trimec, any sort of lawn type broadleaf herbicide.
Okay. We've got actually a couple similar questions. Maybe we can try to cover both of them at once here. We have an email question from Webster. I think these are going to both probably head your way, Casey. Yeah. It says, rabbits ate the bark off all the way around my Honeycrisp apple tree, about 3 feet up just where the snow line was. Has some buds on it and does not look dead. Is there any fix for this? And then similar question from Rosalind. Crab apple trees, and plum trees. Voles ate the bark all the way around the trunk at about 3 feet above ground. Had about 6 trees damaged, and will the trees need to be replaced?
Well, I'd probably defer to Jerry on the tree question. I'll answer a little bit on the rodents and rabbits. This was a really tough winter, and we went into the winter with a really high population of meadow voles in particular across the state, and of course they were looking for food, and probably we'll see a lot of this kind of damage. And it's my understanding that this year these trees will bud out and flower and do all those things, but if that layer was damaged enough, none of those nutrients are going to get back to the roots, and the tree is essentially dead but doesn't know it yet. And the proof in the pudding will come next year. And if that tree doesn't come back. Now, sometimes they don't eat deep enough, and there is some nutrients that will get down there, and the tree will scar over and can repair itself, but you'll have to kind of play a wait and see game. Now, the best thing to do with trees like that is to protect them. You can use a hardware cloth, mash around the base of the tree, the trunk of the tree, bring it up above where you think the snow line's going to be, or they sell commercial guards, plastic type guards you can put around the trunk, and that would be the best fix, of course.
Yep. Casey, I think you put it very well that, sometimes these trees don't know they're dead yet, is what it amounts to. They'll leaf out in the spring, they'll flower because they've got some nutrients up there, but then all of a sudden they realize there's nothing coming back up from the root because it was girdled. And so by late spring, early summer here, you're going to know if that tree is alive or dead and whether you need to replace it or not.
All right, thank you. We've got a question right back at you, Jerry, about raspberries from Brookings here. Question says, I planted a new raspberry patch this spring. About 60% of the canes have leafed out. How long should I wait for the remaining 40% to leaf out before replacing them with new stock? And it says that the date of planting was about 4 weeks ago. 4 weeks ago, okay. You're really going to enjoy those raspberries, I'm sure. So my hat's off to you for planting a raspberry planting. I'd say don't get too anxious to be replacing those with the cool, wet conditions that we've had. Some of those are going to lag a little bit further behind. You might want to wait another 2 to 3 weeks to see if those are viable plants in there before you get too excited about replacing. All right. Weed question back at you, Mike. Lawn is infested with dandelions, but they say, I do not want to use chemicals that will kill milkweed or other food sources for wildlife.
Oh, okay.
Is there a late season control for dandelion that would avoid killing wildlife food resources? And this is from Edgerton, Minnesota.
Well, sure, I suppose, dandelions could be a wildlife food source too out there, and so you might want to consider that also. But it is good to be a good neighbor and control your dandelions so you're not infesting the whole area with dandelion seed. Sure, late fall is a great time. And plus, dandelions is a perennial, like we mentioned earlier, that's really the time you want to go after these perennials. Even if we're spraying now on your dandelions, a lot of them will come back because we're just kind of defoliating them. We just can't, the herbicide just doesn't move into the roots this time of the year in the spring. All the carbohydrates are coming up from the roots, and so it's really hard to get those perennials in the spring. But, the only thing we're doing now is we're defoliating them, we're preventing seed production. But absolutely, spray them in the fall. Your milkweeds will be done in the fall. Your garden will be done. You can even go into the late fall after the tree leaves are starting to change, or even as they're starting to fall. Great time to go after spraying these perennials. Plus, you minimize the chance of injuring your trees and your other plants. So, absolutely, I think they have a real good suggestion of going in the fall for those perennials.
Okay. Back to Jerry, I think, probably. This is from Chancellor, South Dakota. They say, I have a pasque flower plant. Had about 40 blossoms on it and looked really nice. It's done blooming now and the flowers are dried up. Should I cut them off or leave them on?
It depends on your concept of aesthetic beauty in your flower beds is what it amounts to. You can leave it on. If this is a true pasque, like our South Dakota state flower, I don't think it would hurt to leave that on. It will revert back to foliage. If it's the other pasque flower that they sell commercially, they call a pasque but is not the true pasque, you can leave that kind of smoky looking flower head on there just as kind of a highlight in the flower bed as well. So whatever your personal opinion of beauty and cleanliness in your flower beds is, go with it.
Okay. Bounce right back to Mike again. Is there any product on the market that will kill grass in a flower bed without harming the flowers?
Yeah, there is. The problem is it probably won't control the type of grasses that you're going after right now, unfortunately, because a lot of the grasses that you're seeing right now, if you have grasses up right now, they're probably perennial grasses, and those are pretty tough to kill. But there is a product, if you kind of hunt for it, one of the products is called Grass Be Gone, or sometimes there's another product called Over the Top. There's a handful of products out there that are intended for grass control in landscapes. And these herbicides are quite unique in the fact that they're only active on grasses. They will not hurt. You can spray it on trees, any broadleaf plant, Won't hurt them at all. It's only active on the grasses. The downside is it only kills the shoot, the growing point in the shoot of the grass. Now perennials, they'll come right back from the roots, and so all you're going to be doing is suppressing those perennial grasses that we have right now. So that's a downside. But at least you can suppress them. Maybe that'll be good enough. Otherwise, really, in those situations where we have perennial grasses in the flower beds, really just kind of hand pulling is really the best we can do. Hand pulling and mulching and the old ways of controlling weeds. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. From Bloomfield, Nebraska, question for Casey. You were talking about hummingbird feeders and showed one. I was wondering how you keep ants out. They seem to love that sugar water.
If I could figure that out, I'd be rich, I think. I don't know how to keep ants out, and I've heard of people using all kinds of things, and putting grease on the chain, because they have to follow some kind of some road down to the nectar, and I've never found one that's very effective. And so my solution is just to wash and clean my feeders often, to kind of minimize any, because the ants are going to be bringing in all kinds of fungus and junk into that sugar water and then cause it to ferment, which is what we don't want to happen. So.
Okay. Last week, John Ball, Extension Forestry Specialist, taught us the proper way to plant a tree. We rejoined John in the backyard to learn how to care for that newly planted tree.
Well, we got the tree planted, and now we need to do one more thing to make sure this grows to be a happy, healthy tree, and that's mulch. And I mean mulch, mulch, mulch. So let's take a look at what we can do for mulching. First of all, the purpose of mulching is to keep the soil a little cooler, a little moister, and reduce grass competition. There's really two materials that are frequently used for mulching. First of all, rock. Usually washed river rock is used. This is probably the best if you're in a very windy location, but rock doesn't gradually break down, at least in our time period, and provide elements to the soil. What's better to use is a shredded bark mulch or a wood chip mulch. Either can be used, and they can be used together. What's nice about this mulch is it will gradually break down and will incorporate some elements back in the soil. So this is the preferred mulch to use if you're not in an excessively windy location. The other decision you have to make is, do you want to put a fabric underneath the mulch? There's a variety of fabrics that are available to be used. The fabrics allow water and elements to move through, but keep weeds from growing up through them. So it's a great material to use. And if you're using rock, you have to use one of these fiber mats here to keep the weeds from coming up through. What I prefer, though, is to use just a good organic bark wood mulch and put it directly on the soil. This way, this is going to be gradually incorporated in and break down and add organic matter to the soil, and that's important too. So the best way to do it is just spread out your wood chips and your bark, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to spread it a little farther than the edge of the hole. Yeah, we'll smother some grass, but that's good. Grass is a tough competitor with our tree, and so the less grass we have, the better. And it only needs to be about 2 to 3 inches thick. I don't want to see any mulch volcanoes where you pile the mulch up along the trunk here. And in fact, what we want to do is leave about 6 inches open around the base of the tree. That keeps it from being a good hiding spot for rodents and other small critters. So spread the mulch out in a circle, a little beyond the grass, leave about a 6-inch opening around it, have the mulch about 2 to 3 inches thick. Then the only other thing you got to do the rest of the season is water, water, water. Make sure you're watering weekly to get this tree off to a good start. So between the mulch and the watering, your tree's off to a good, happy life.
Okay, we're back with some more questions at this point. We'll start handing them out to people again. We start with an apple pollination question out of Hayti. They say they have Golden Delicious and Haralson apple trees, and the Delicious is dying. Can they plant a new Haralson tree to help pollinate the old Haralson tree, or should they plant a different variety that might be better?
That's a darn good question. And I'm not surprised that the Delicious is dying, because the Delicious varieties are not hardy enough for South Dakota. I'm surprised it has maybe made it this long, but South Dakota winter will catch up with that particular variety in a quick hurry here. Haralson, on the other hand, is well adapted to South Dakota. And as to the pollination question of that, no, another Haralson will not pollinate a Haralson. You have to have different varieties or cultivars of trees in order to accomplish that pollination process. What you could do if you've got a Haralson, you could go with a Harrell Red, you could go with a State Fair, Sweet 16, the new Honeycrisp that's all the rage right now. Any other variety of apple, including crab apples, will pollinate that Haralson, but a Haralson does not pollinate another Haralson.
Okay. Grass question here, and we'll kind of open it up and
Jerry might
jump in on it. Question comes from Ipswich. It says, I've seen advertisements for zoysia grass for yards. My question is about whether or not the grass is weedy. If I plant it, will it spread to my neighbor's yard or to native areas?
Zoysia grass, the advertisements show up in the spring circulars, the newspaper inserts in the spring every year, late winter, early spring, encouraging people to grow zoysia grass. It claims that it populates the area very quickly, chokes out weeds. I don't know, it has all sorts of attributes that it lists there, and by the time you get done reading down through it, you think, my gosh, where can I get this stuff? I mean, it just sounds like too good to be true, and in fact, it is too good to be true for South Dakota, because it is not hardy enough to make it through the first winter in South Dakota. Granted, there are some lawns with zoysia grass down in the Vermilion, Yankton area, but they last about maybe 5 years until that winter comes along that takes them out. There's zoysia grasses down into, or lawns down into Nebraska, but up in this part of the country, you'd get a nicely established lawn with zoysia grass and the first winter would finish it. So don't invest in zoysia grass. Look more at Kentucky bluegrass and the fine leaf fescues and the blends thereof for our northern lawns.
Or maybe about any of the warm season grasses?
Warm season grasses would, yeah, you're right, John. Thank you for bringing that up. The other option for our lawns in South Dakota would be the lower maintenance native type grasses, the warm season grasses such as buffalo grass, blue grama, or combinations of those two.
And those would be hardy here?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Two-part weed question here for you. And this comes from Hot Springs. Whatever happened to the wax weed be gone bars that you could drag behind lawnmowers? They were nice because drift was not an issue.
Okay.
And then the second part is, does cutting dandelion crowns do any good?
Well, the wax weed be gone bars. I'm not familiar with that, but apparently you remember those?
We had this old Mosall mower back on the farm when I was a kid, and we would always drag that wax bar behind that would, on a good hot South Dakota day, would wipe a little bit of 2,4-D and this wax on the weeds, and it did quite a nice job.
Oh, okay. I've never heard of that before. This is the first time I've ever even heard of that. One thing I've noticed getting a little bit more popularity are some of these wiper type things that just kind of, they're like a roller that has a herbicide on a roller, and that just rolls across the grass. but I've heard some bad things about it. You know, for one thing, how do you calibrate that? You know, you got this herbicide on there. Very easy to use too much herbicide, and of course, even if it's a broadleaf herbicide, you use too much, and you're going to burn off your grass. And so I've heard that happening. Also, people get a little bold and they think, oh, I can get right next to the garden now. I'm not spraying. You know, I don't have to worry about drift. But those herbicides, you know, they vaporize, and you still get those vapors that can move. So still, you know, with some of those products, they're catching on in some popularity, but still watch out for some risks there. So I don't know. Keep your eye out for the wax thing. Maybe it'll come back. I don't know. Cutting off the crowns of dandelions, the second part of the question, no, it doesn't work. You know, last summer, I was dedicated to being herbicide-free in my yard. And so I went out the whole, you know, almost every other day I walked through my yard with like a screwdriver, and I went out and poked up those dandelions, and I felt pretty good about it. I was getting a good chunk of the root. Well, later on, about midsummer, I started seeing these little patches, these funny patches of dandelions. It wasn't just one dandelion rosette, it was like a patch. And I would dig down, and there would be several little stems. It was just, those roots were just regrowing from what I had cut earlier. So not doing anything there. So really the question is for any of you guys out there digging dandelions, how much do you need to get? I think it depends on the size of the root, but I can tell you 2 inches was not enough of any normal size root. A small root, maybe that's good enough, but if you have a normal size root, you probably really need to get about half or 3/4 of that root at least to prevent it from regrowing. So the dandelion pulling it's a tough endeavor, but you know,
any chance
anything helps.
Maybe combining the two, or they get that crown up just a little bit and then coat it with something as a contact?
Probably not going to help a whole lot. Nope, unfortunately. Yeah, I would just do one or the other. Yep.
Okay, sounds good. All right, we got to maybe include Dennis a little bit on one here. It says we've got a pink spires flowering crab tree that was planted last summer. It's now 6 to 8 feet tall. It was flowering until frost last week. Now there are no flowers. They're wondering if it was frost damaged, and is there anything they can do? Maybe add more water to it? They don't want to lose the tree.
Where is this coming from?
It comes from Sioux Falls.
Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls didn't get as cold as some of the other places did. You know, they were hanging around. Most everybody was hanging around freezing. So there could be it certainly could be. Can't rule that out. But if it's relatively young, I think it could be more susceptible to frost damage. Am I correct in that?
That would be true, yeah. I'm wondering if it didn't just complete its flowering process. The pollination, if it took place, if there were pollinators around to complete that, has taken place, and so we reach that point of petal fall, and the flowering season is done. Now it progresses on into producing the fruit if it has been properly pollinated. So that could be an option too.
Okay.
So I'll probably have to wait on that one just to see. Wait it out to see what happens.
Wait and see.
Yeah.
Patience.
And for future reference, is there a way to maybe help those things out before the frost happens, or you just hope and wait that it doesn't happen?
Well, I guess it was a tree. Was that correct?
It was a tree.
Okay, it was a tree. Trees, I have a hard time getting something large enough to cover a tree. Certainly, plants you can cover with blankets or something like that, or buckets to plants that are small enough. Trees are large enough. The other thing about trees too is you have to remember that we measure temperatures at about 6 feet. You know, that the temperature that's here reported is about 6 feet. Down closer to the ground, the temperature will actually be colder. So trees are going to be above that 6 feet, will be experiencing a little bit warmer temperatures, so are a little less susceptible to that because they are up higher from that actual level.
So worry first about those garden plants.
Worry first about the garden plants. That's right.
Later.
Yep.
All right. From Coleman, I didn't get around to pruning trees this last year. Is it too late to do it now in the next few weeks, or should I wait?
At this point, you would be better off waiting because to prune trees at this time of the year, that wound is not going to heal very quickly at all. It's got other things, other priorities right now, and that's putting on growth and flowers and just manufacturing food and laying it down, providing it to the plant. And so that healing process is not going to take place as quickly as it will if you do that pruning at the right time of the year. When is that? That's while the tree is dormant. The big picture, the entire time frame that you have to do proper pruning would be any time from the time the leaves drop off that tree and the tree goes dormant in the fall, late fall, throughout the entire winter and up until the buds start to swell again in the spring. But the optimum, ideal time is about the tail end of March, first part of April, just before that tree is going to wake up, because pruning cuts made at that time are going to heal over very quickly and seal off that wood so that there won't be an entry point for decay pathogens.
Okay. We come back to your sweet potatoes, Jerry.
Gracious. Oh, okay, sweet potatoes. Yeah, you got my ear now.
And from Brookings.
Okay.
They grew sweet potatoes last year, had great success, but after they were dug, they spoiled quickly. Do you have any storage tips or suggestions for growing them that would help them keep longer?
First of all, the harvesting. The proper time to harvest those sweet potatoes grown in South Dakota would be just before or immediately after a killing frost. The vines have to be killed off before the roots can start that curing process, and that brings us to the next thing, is curing. In order to properly cure sweet potatoes, you need to hold them for at least 10 days at 80 to 85 degrees and really high humidity, 85 to 90% relative humidity. If you can accomplish that, you've got them cured. And then you need to put them in a dark place. Exposure to light will stimulate them to start to sprout, much as our Irish potatoes as well. You need to put them in that dark place and hold them at about 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. If you get that done, they should store quite well. The other very important thing is do not bruise or scratch or injure those sweet potatoes in any manner, shape, or form through the washing process, through the storage. Even line your boxes or baskets with rags, blankets, that sort of thing to keep from injuring them, because the slightest little injury or scratch will be an opening for decay pathogens.
Okay. We come back to Casey with some animal questions. From Madison, we've got squirrel problems in bird feeders. I think it's the age-old problem, isn't it? They say, I have sunflower, corn, and millet in a bird feeder, and the squirrels are eating it. They climb up a metal pole to get to the feeder. What can I do to stop this?
Well, they do sell, it's like a round flange that you can put on the pole that will dissuade squirrels from climbing the pole. I've also known people to be successful in having a longer pole and then greasing it, and you know, it's kind of like squirrel comedy at that point. But anyway, you know, I think the squirrel excluders actually work fairly well. They're maybe 18 inches to 2 feet in diameter, and they fit around the pole, and they just don't allow the squirrel up. Now you need to make sure that you don't have a tree overhanging, because squirrels are terribly ingenious, and if there's something there to eat, they will figure it out. So as just a side note, I would encourage folks the millet seed, especially if it's in a mixed feed mixture, and you put it in a feeder. There's a lot of birds, and most birds are going to be after the sunflower seed in that mix, and what they'll do is come and they'll just kick all that other millet out on the ground to get at the sunflower seeds, which kind of makes a mess. Now there are birds that like the millet, and so what I do is I take about literally a cup full of millet every morning, and I just go out and hand strew it on the ground for the birds that like to feed on the ground. And it kind of keeps the things kind of cleaned up and provides for them, and also I don't have birds cleaning out my feeders just to get at the few sunflower seeds, you know. So
good advice.
Yep.
Okay, creeping Charlie in a lawn. This is from Watertown, and they say, I've got creeping Charlie in my yard, has the purple flowers and small round leaves, and it's getting out of control and going to my neighbor's place. What are my control options?
Yeah, I'm sure your neighbors would appreciate you doing something about that while you're at it. Well, we talked about creeping bellflower earlier. That's a tough weed, but creeping Charlie is also another really tough perennial weed. And as you probably noticed, it kind of spreads above ground by those stolons, and it takes root, and it just keeps on going. It's not really susceptible to a lot of herbicides, although they can be effective. But again, it's a multiple-year approach. So creeping Charlie, it's a perennial. We spray it in the spring. We're just going to be defoliating it. We can spray it with a Weed B Gone, Trimec. Any of those typical lawn broadleaf herbicides that have dicamba in them are going to be somewhat effective. But we really want to hit it in the fall, and probably twice in the fall, like with a spot spray type of thing. Hit it once in September, and then maybe again in mid-October. But again, it's going to be a multiple-year type of a program, and I'd really focus along that property line in particular to kind of keep your neighbor happy as well. I want to watch out for that. So it's good that you're interested in controlling it. I would urge you to go after it. There's non-herbicide options out there, but that's even tougher yet. You know, sometimes people can rake it out. It is kind of viney, and sometimes you can kind of rake it out that way and that sort of thing. But it's a real tough weed problem, and it's going to take a lot of effort in a couple of years. But eventually, you'll get on top of it.
Okay, going to go right back to Casey. You got robins building a nest in a carport in Aberdeen, and they're making a mess. Is there any way to discourage them from building a nest in that carport?
My best advice to you is just when you see them start building that nest is just be persistent in knocking it down, and make it difficult for them, because they're eventually going to get the message, and they'll go elsewhere and build their nest. You know, and the same would apply to barn swallows in particular that like to nest above people's doors on their porch. I love having barn swallows around, but I don't like them above my door, because wherever they have a nest, there's gonna be a nice white mess below it, you know. So you just need to be persistent. When you see them starting to bring nesting materials there, just keep knocking them away, and they'll move elsewhere.
Okay. We got a wormwood weed problem here from Aberdeen.
Oh.
They planted blue grama and buffalo grass. They say it was just seeded, and they had some wildflowers in the mix. Seeded last fall. About 25% of the area is growing wormwood this year. It's about 10 to 12 inches high already. Grasses and wildflowers are just getting established. How do they control the weed?
So now, this was wormwood growing in the lawn, or the grasses and the wildflowers, or among wildflowers?
Well, it looks like both. They planted a mixture of the grasses and the wildflowers together, and I'm not sure if it's a lawn setting.
Oh, okay, all right. This might be like a native type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Ooh, yeah, tough.
It does make it tough.
Yeah. But you know, this is becoming a more common problem as people are trying to establish native grasses with native forbs, because a lot of their native flowers are very nice, and for wildlife habitat, that sort of thing. But inevitably, we get weeds in there. Now, what do? How do you control those weeds without killing those nice native forbs that you just seeded in? And it's not real easy. You know, wormwood sage is a perennial. It's not a creeping perennial like some of the other creepers we were talking about, but it gets a really good heavy-duty, kind of almost a large root system to it that it'll be persistent. So really, you can go in there manually and move them out by hand, dig them out, that sort of thing. You could spot spray, but again, you know, those areas that you spot spray, you're going to damage your forbs, and so that's a bad thing there. But if you do spray, you don't have to use anything really potent. That wormwood sage is sensitive to just 2,4-D, or even 2,4-D is basically is as good as anything else for the wormwood sage. And you could get it in late fall, maybe after some of your native forbs have seeded out and are going dormant. That wormwood sage will stay green really late in the fall, mid-October, so maybe that would be a good time to treat it to help minimize some of your forbs. But I would spot treat, minimize contact to those forbs. You're probably going to have some forb injury, but if you're going to be using herbicides, it's going to be a delicate situation. Otherwise, hand pulling them is the only other way. On the plus side, if you've got some patience, after several years, your grass may thicken up enough to kind of crowd out the wormwood sage. We've done long-term studies, actually up by Watertown, we did a long-term study, and we found among the non-herbicide options, we tried mowing and all that sort of thing. Turned out after about 3-4 years, it would have been best if we had just left it alone, because eventually the grasses do kind of crowd it out. depending on your grass stand, that sort of thing. But be careful, you know, spot spraying is probably going to be the easiest, most direct route with 2,4-D in the fall, late fall.
Just one other point I'd like to add to that. This is kind of a good lesson for people that are thinking about putting in native grasses, native flowers, that sort of thing. It would be highly advisable before they just till the area and throw the seed on to perhaps fallow that area for at least a year to control those weeds that are in there, such as the wormwood sage or any other tough to control perennial weeds, creeping jenny, quackgrass, Canada thistle, that sort of thing. By fallowing it for a year, you can hopefully eliminate those perennials and the wormwood sage and all the other weeds before you put in the native grasses and flowers, and you'll have a lot less headache.
That's a great point. In fact, another option along with that is maybe get your grasses growing first. And that way, if you do have some of these weedy broadleaf plants coming up, then you can spray them in the grass, then plant your forbs after you're pretty confident you're not going to get some of these noxious weeds coming in. So, yeah, but otherwise, just leaving it fallow for a year and getting good weed control is a great tactic.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we've got for tonight. Just to let you know, Garden Line repeats twice each week on South Dakota Public Broadcasting Digital Channel 3, also known as the Create channel. The encore broadcast can be seen Thursdays at 11 a.m. Central and Saturdays at 4 p.m. Central. Check your local listings to find SDPB TV 3. Thanks again to our panel of experts tonight, Casey Jensen, SDSU Wildlife and Fisheries Sciences, Jerry Mills, Mike Mechnig, and Dennis Toddy. And thank you to our phone volunteers, a group from the North Central Agricultural Research Lab. Thanks for watching tonight and calling in. Have a good evening.